Imagine the sun beating down on your shoulders as you traverse endless sands, the horizon shimmering with heat. Every grain of sand tells a story of time uncounted, of journeys taken and promises broken. Your companion on this journey is a humble donkey, steady in its gait, reliable in its simplicity. You expect silence from this creature, a silence that mirrors the desolation around you. Yet in that moment, when your heart is weighed down by questions and doubts, the donkey opens its mouth to speak. Its voice is clear, carrying with it a power that startles you more than any thunderclap. You stop in your tracks, eyes wide, pulse racing. The desert wind seems to still as the donkey's words cut through the heat. You strain to believe what you hear, to reconcile reality with the impossible. How can this creature, bound by earthly form, become the vessel for divine truth? In that instant, the boundaries between heaven and earth blur, and you realize that God's voice can resound through the most unlikely of messengers. This is not fantasy or fevered dream. This is a confrontation with truth you have long ignored. This is the story of Balaam, a prophet of renown who stood at the crossroads of power and piety. Hired by a king who coveted blessing for his nation, Balaam faced a choice that would test the very core of his faith. He possessed a gift unmatched among men, the ability to pronounce words that could shape destinies. Yet with every step toward earthly reward, his heart wrestled between loyalty to the Most High and the glitter of gold promised by mortals. As you listen to the donkey's cry, you witness Balaam's internal conflict laid bare. The creature's voice is a mirror reflecting his divided soul. With each protest from beneath him, Balaam is forced to reckon with his own ambitions. How often do we, like Balaam, chase after success at the expense of obedience? How readily do we silence the still, small voice within, the whisper of conscience that guides us toward integrity? The donkey's plea becomes a sacred interruption, a call to return to true purpose. In that moment, the desert becomes a classroom, the donkey a teacher. The vast emptiness reveals the fullness of God's sovereignty. As Balaam senses the divine presence enveloping him, he remembers the warnings he tried to dismiss, the divine directives he sought to bend for personal gain. The sands beneath him shift not only with wind, but with the weight of revelation. In this narrative, we find an invitation to listen for voices we might overlook, to recognize that wisdom can emerge from the lowliest of places, to understand that true prophecy is not purchased by silver or gold, but granted by a heart aligned with divine will. As you dwell on this encounter, consider the unseen voices in your own life, the nudges, the warnings, the gentle urgings of truth. Will you heed them, or will you let ambition blind you to the lessons delivered by unexpected messengers? Thus begins our journey into the heart of Numbers 22, where a donkey's voice becomes the herald of divine purpose, and a prophet's soul is laid bare beneath the unrelenting sun. Stay with us as we uncover the layers of meaning hidden within this astonishing event, and discover how a voice from the unseen can speak directly to your own path. You ride through the twilight moorlands, the horizon painted in purples and deep blues, as your thoughts swirl with unease. Off to the east, just beyond the veil of night, you glimpse the distant glow of Israel's encampment tents, as numerous as stars strewn across the plain. Word has reached the ears of Moab's king, Balak, that this rolling sea of people advances with an unstoppable force, their reputation whipped into a fearful crescendo by tales of desert wanderings and divine deliverance. To Balak, they are not merely an army in transit, but a harbinger of doom, a people anointed by a powerful God, whose name echoes like thunder in the heavens. Balak's heart pounds in his chest as he surveys the encampment from his vantage point atop Pisgah's slopes. His counselors murmur anxiously at his side, fear tightening their throats. "They come," they whisper. "They come with a power we cannot face." Balak feels his kingdom trembling beneath his feet. He is a king who has seen the ebb and flow of fortunes. He has withstood the might of mighty empires. Yet here he stands, confronted by an unseen force that advances like a living tide. Desperation coils around him, fueling a decision that will send ripples across the sands. Under the cover of darkness, emissaries prepare for departure camel trains laden with shimmering bronze, silver ingots, and the finest wool dyed in vivid hues. Sandals strike the rock-strewn path, and horses shift impatiently as the caravan readies itself. These envoys carry a message wrought from fear and ambition. Summon Balaam the son of Beor. Bring him swift to our council. Bid him curse Israel, that our borders may stand firm and our name endure. For Balaam is fabled far beyond the oasis towns and trade routes. He is a soothsayer whose words can either bless or blight with uncanny precision, a man who stands in the shadow of the divine, whose lips channel the voice of heaven. To the Moabite mind, Balaam's power is a tool to be wielded. Balak envisions the prophet's incantations raining ruin upon the Israelites' fields turning barren, warriors losing heart, the very land rising against them. If only Balaam would speak the words that bend God's hand to Moab's favor, all would be well. Thus the caravan departs, cutting across the desert gloom, led by elders whose ornate robes catch the torchlight in flickering patterns. They carry not only wealth, but also pride, a conviction that no god can withstand human cunning when it moves with enough gold and persuasion. As dawn breaks over the hills, the emissaries arrive at Balaam's dwelling. It is a simple abode of sun-baked clay and palm-thatched roof set against the rust-red cliffs. The prophet stands at the threshold, cloak wrapped tightly against the morning chill, eyes clouded with an inner burden. When he beholds their splendor, chests overflowing with treasure, attendants proffering gifts, he regards it with a calm that unsettles the envoys. Their leader, adorned in purple and fine linen, steps forward with deference and urgency. He bows, voice resonant. Balaam, son of Beor, the gods have spoken of your potency. King Balak begs your counsel. Come with us to curse this people who threaten our land. Go with our honor and our reward. Balaam listens, the lines on his weathered face deepening. He has heard such entreaties before the lure of wealth and acclaim whispering like serpents in his ear. Yet in the quiet chambers of his soul, a divine whisper answers for him. Speak only as I command, he murmurs, each word deliberate. The Moabite emissaries exchange glances of disbelief, for their faith hinges on Balaam's compliance. They had counted on his eagerness to oblige. They had assumed that the promise of riches would unbolt his lips like a key in iron. But Balaam is no mere mercenary. He knows the weight of the voice that dwells within him, the voice that shapes destinies. To utter a curse against Israel without divine sanction would be to unleash wrath upon himself. He cannot barter with his gift. He cannot betray the one whose word electrifies the cosmos. So he answers them gently but firmly. Stay here tonight. Let me seek the Lord's counsel. Tomorrow I will tell you what I hear. The envoys, though uneasy, accept this provisional refusal. They unstrap their camels, share bread and dates, and encamp around the prophet's modest hearth. As they feast and converse in low tones, Balaam retreats into prayer. Head bowed, lips moving in silence, he seeks the face of the Almighty. The wind sighs through the palms, carrying with it a hush that seems to still the world. You can almost see the spiritual tension hanging in the air, a moment pregnant with potential. When Balaam emerges at dawn, he bears a message that chills the emissaries to their core. With eyes that glint like polished onyx, he declares, I have spoken with the Lord, and I cannot go with you, for the Lord refuses to permit me to curse those whom he has not cursed. Shock ripples through the delegation. They had expected deference, a quick acquiescence once Balaam beheld their wealth. Yet here they stand, clutching empty hands, their hopes dashed upon the rocks of divine decree. Not willing to be repulsed so easily, Balak's envoys return to their king with news of failure. Balak's fury ignites like wildfire amid dry brush. He will not suffer rejection. In his court, he fashions a new cohort of dignitaries, princes of Midian, and leaders of Zalman and Sarat, all bearing gifts more sumptuous than before. Golden platters encrusted with jewels, aromatic oils distilled from exotic groves, and chariots gleaming like captured sunlight. His pride stung, Balak sends word again. Go back to Balaam, assure him of our higher honor, entreat him with greater riches. Tell him the hour is now. He must not delay. Thus the scene shifts back to Balaam's door, where messengers twice blessed with sea foam and mountain dew arrive like persistent shadows. The third delegation approaches with an air of solemn opulence, a silent parade of splendor meant to dazzle and overwhelm. They lay out their riches before the prophet and plead once more. Come, O man of words carved by heaven, come with us now and grant us the downfall of Israel. They implore him in whispers meant to melt steel, but Balaam remains unmoved. In his heart, the echo of God's earlier word reverberates. If the men come to call you, rise and go with them, but only the word that I speak to you shall you do. Numbers 22:20. In that pivotal moment, Balaam stands at the threshold of destiny. Before him lies the path of worldly acclaim, paved with gold and crowned by human applause. Behind him, the voice of the Most High beckons him into a covenant he cannot betray. You sense the tension in his posture, shoulders squared by resolve, yet eyes haunted by the weight of the decision. This is the juncture where flesh and spirit collide, where ambition tugs at the fringes of obedience. So Balaam makes his choice. With a voice as steady as dawn light, he tells the envoys, I will go with you, but only if it pleases the Lord. A hush falls over the onlookers, for they recognize a power greater than any king's decree. They mount their camels once more, laden with riches and wonder, and set off toward Moab's summit, where Balak awaits with anxious heart. Yet even as they depart, the air crackles with unseen currents of divine will. And you know that the prophet's true journey has only just begun. In this tale of summons and supplication, we witness a king's desperation and a prophet's dilemma. We see how human schemes clash with heavenly decrees, how glittering temptations falter before one clear command. And as the caravan fades into the heat-hazed distance, you realize that the most formidable summons is not from a mortal king, but from the voice that echoes beyond the stars, a summons that will call Balaam not to curse but to bless. A pale light breaks over the eastern horizon as Balaam rises to meet the day. The air is still cool, a reprieve from the desert's furnace, and a sense of anticipation tugs at his heart. Last night, in the quiet sanctuary of his tent, he heard the voice that shapes creation itself. It was not a thunderous command nor a fleeting whisper lost on the wind. It was a clear decree. Rise, go with those who have come to summon you, but only speak the word I give you. Balaam felt the weight of divine permission settle upon his shoulders like a cloak woven of both promise and warning. He knows the gravity of what lies ahead, to mount his donkey and ride toward the summit of Pisgah, where King Balak waits, crown tilted with anxiety, eager for words of power. Yet he also knows the peril that obedience demands a purity of purpose his own heart may yet fail to maintain. He steps out into the soft glow of dawn and finds the Moabite emissaries gathered by his courtyard wall. Their rich clothing still shimmers in the half-light. Silken robes embroidered with gold thread, precious oils distilled from faraway groves, chalices heavy with gemstones. Their eyes fix on him, expectant and unblinking, as though to will his lips to move on their own. Balaam meets their gaze steadily, for the Lord's word courses through his veins. I will go with you, he tells them, but only the word I speak shall I utter when I am there. A flicker of relief crosses their faces, quickly masked by polite smiles. They do not truly understand that in granting this conditional assent, Balaam goes not out of unbounded eagerness, but out of restraint. They mount their camels and set out, Balaam among them, the slender rod of his staff tapping against leather camel tack. With each footfall, the caravan stirs the dust of the desert floor, sending fine motes into the dawn light like sparks from a forge. As they depart, Balaam's thoughts drift back to the place where that word was spoken. The night had been deep and silent, save for the crackle of embers in his hearth and the murmur of palms outside. In that hush he knelt, listening for the living voice. Had his heart been pure enough to receive? Had he truly laid aside dreams of glory? He remembers the flicker of images, visions of silver and purple cloaks, of a king's gratitude spread out before him like a banquet table. He remembers the pang of longing, the soft seduction of prestige, and he recalls the Lord's gentle reprimand threaded within the promise, "Do only what I command." The Moabite guides lead them through stony passes where shadows cling to the red cliffs, and water seeps in hidden pools beneath ancient boulders. The party moves with purpose, eyes turned ahead to that high place where Balak's pavilion shimmers like a mirage. His heart hammers at each step, not from fear of men, but from the gravity of what he carries within the potential to shape destinies by a single word. Word of his coming races ahead of him through Moab's tents. Messages fly on sandaled feet. The prophet of divine oracles rides this way. By the time he arrives at the foot of Pisgah's ridge, a small host of nobles has assembled to welcome him. Trumpets cry out a regal fanfare, and Balak himself emerges, flanked by priests clad in scarlet, their heads bowed in a ritual of supplication. Balaam dismounts with measured dignity, cloak rustling, staff in hand. He inclines his head but offers no other gesture, for he stands not before Balak's throne, but before the presence of the Almighty. Balak's voice trembles with relief and excitement. "Balaam," he says, "I have prepared 7 altars and offered 7 bullocks and 7 rams. Come now, pronounce the curse upon these people, that they may depart from us, for they are too mighty for us." His words spill over Balaam like a torrent, but the prophet's eyes remain distant, his gaze sweeping across the Israelite encampment, stretched out below like an immense tapestry of white tents. The murmurs of the Moabites rise to a clamor. How could Balaam tarry when every moment cost them precious security? Yet Balaam lifts his hand in calm authority. He sets aside the expectations of a king and the pleadings of nobles. He sets aside the glittering promise of reward. He beckons them instead to behold something deeper than earthly gain. He turns his back to Balak and peers through the morning haze at the Israelite host. In that instant, Balaam senses the pulse of divine favor settling over them like a banner. He inhales the cool air, and each breath carries with it the echo of the Creator's heart. He remembers the Lord's charge, "You shall only speak what I command." And he knows that to fulfill that command is to honor a higher covenant than any forged by gold. Yet even as he prepares to speak, a tremor of foreboding runs through him. For he understands that permission does not equate to approval of motive. The Lord has granted him leave to go, but the purity of his speech remains conditional upon the state of his heart. Each of his thoughts, each of his words will be weighed against that divine standard. In the musing of his mind, can a man truly silence covetousness when he beholds such splendor? Casts a shadow over the moment. Balaam draws a deep breath and begins. "Balak, son of Zippor, hear the word of the Lord." His voice, as it rises, carries the authority of heaven itself. The assembled nobles lean forward, hungry for the curse they have paid so dearly to receive. Balaam pauses, and in that silence, the wind stirs the desert grasses, as though nature itself holds its breath. Then he speaks the word, not a curse, but a blessing. He proclaims that Israel is a people set apart, a nation loved and guarded by the Most High. Fields will bloom where they tread, their tents will flourish like gardens along a riverbank. Their enemies' strength will dwindle before them. With each phrase, the faces of Balak's priests grow pallid, shock rippling until even the stones beneath their feet seem to shudder. Balaam watches, unblinking, as the deception he was hired to enact collapses in real time. He sees Balak's posture buckle, his regal mask slipping into raw disappointment. He sees the noble's eyes flicker from hope to anger, then to a grudging awe at the clarity of God's decree. And Balaam feels that foreshadowed trouble rise like a tide within him. The chasm between his intention to obey and his human longing for honor threatens to consume him. Yet he speaks on, channeling every syllable with the conviction that it is not he who determines destiny, but the God who reigns over heaven and earth. When he finally falls silent, the air crackles with tension. Balak's attendants scramble to reignite their hopes, but Balaam remains motionless, his staff planted firmly in the desert sand. In that charged stillness, Balaam perceives the true cost of divine permission. It is not a free pass to indulge personal ambition. It is a sacred commission that demands integrity even when no one watches. The emissaries had treated his gift as a commodity, believing they could purchase it with riches. But divine permission is not a transaction, it is a trust. Balak, his face ashen, speaks again, but the words stumble in his throat. Why then, if you will not curse them, did you come? Balaam meets his gaze, and for a moment, the desert's vast emptiness echoes within them both. Balaam's reply is simple and unadorned. The Lord said, "Speak only what I command you." With those words, the summit of Pisgah becomes a crossroads of revelation. The Moabite host disperses in dejection, some muttering of injustice, others awed into respect. Balaam descends the ridge, but each footstep is heavy with the knowledge that he has faced something more formidable than earthly kings. He has faced the pure will of the Almighty, and in blessing what he was hired to curse, he has glimpsed the true measure of obedience. As he makes his way back toward his own land, the desert stretches out before him, empty yet alive with the memory of divine permission granted and tested. The camel trains fall into the rhythm of travel, and Balaam's heart settles into a sober calm. He has learned that to go where God commands is to relinquish the promise of personal acclaim. And he has learned that true power lies not in words bought by silver, but in words uttered in faithful submission. Thus ends the chapter of conditional assent, but its consequences will echo far beyond the sands of Moab. For in that turning point, Balaam, once torn between gold and godliness, has chosen the path of integrity. And the echo of his blessing will follow Israel into the promised land, a testament to the truth that divine permission, when met with a willing heart, brings life rather than death. A pale dawn light filtered through the dunes as Balaam set out from his camp, the two servants walking by his side. The road to Moab stretched before them, a ribbon of beaten earth cutting through fields of sagebrush and rocky outcrops. The donkey beneath him plodded steadily, its hooves stirring little puffs of dust that caught the rising sun. Balaam's heart throbbed with a mixture of anticipation and unease. He had received the Lord's conditional permission to go, yet he could not shake the sense that this journey carried more than royal favor or earthly reward. There was a stillness in the air, as if creation itself held its breath, waiting for what was to come. The servants walked ahead, their voices low with conversation about the task at hand and the wealth that awaited them at Pisgah's summit. Balaam sat in silence, eyes fixed on the horizon where purple hills met the sky. The landscape was stark but alive. Sparrows darted between tamarisks, and the scent of wild thyme lingered on the breeze. Beneath him, the donkey's soft bray punctuated the quiet. Balaam stroked its mane absently, comforted by its familiar presence. He trusted this animal more than he trusted any man, yet neither he nor his servants suspected that unseen eyes watched their every step. Without warning, the donkey halted and swung sideways, treading off the narrow road into a thicket of thorny weeds. Balaam lurched to one side, startled by the abrupt motion. His staff struck the donkey's flank, but the animal only pressed deeper into the scrub, nostrils flared, ears pinned back in panic. "Return to the road," Balaam hissed, his voice tight with frustration. He struck the donkey again, harder this time, and urged it forward. Still, the donkey refused. Wheezing and trembling, it stepped farther from the beaten path, driven by terror from a threat Balaam could neither see nor understand. Balaam's face grew red with anger. He yanked on the reins, leaning close enough to feel the donkey's hot breath. The servants cried out in alarm, rushing forward to plead with their master to show mercy. But Balaam would not relent. He beat the donkey with his staff, each blow echoing across the plains. In that moment, pride and impatience surged through him, drowning out the whispered caution of his conscience. He would not be delayed. He would not allow any creature, no matter how stubborn, to thwart his appointed mission. And so he struck again, his knuckles white around the wooden shaft, until the donkey whimpered and shambled back onto the road. Only then did Balaam realize how deeply unnerved he felt. His heart pounded in his chest and sweat trickled down his temples. He glanced at his servants, their worried eyes reflecting both pity and fear. "Let us go," he said, his voice hollow. He coaxed the donkey forward, his courtesy long since abandoned in the heat of his frustration. As they resumed their journey, the path seemed narrower, the hills closing in like silent spectators. The servants fell into step beside the animal, murmuring gentle words to calm its racing spirit. Balaam, however, rode on, curtain of eyelashes heavy over his eyes, unaware that the assault on the donkey had been only the first act of a divine drama unfolding beyond sight. What Balaam could not know was that an angel of the Lord stood hidden in the roadway, sword drawn, tasked with opposing his path. This unseen adversary moved with purpose to guard the holiness of the mission and to correct the prophet's wayward heart. The donkey had seen the luminous form of heaven's messenger, had crouched in terror at the sight of steel and shadow. Its instincts, honed by days of travel and gentle guidance, had reacted faster than Balaam's own will. Yet Balaam, blinded by his own priorities, punished the messenger's mouthpiece for an act of obedience he could not perceive. The donkey's eyes flashed fear as it mounted a second protest, but Balaam urged it onward with harsh command. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though they carried the weight of divine disapproval. The servants glanced at one another, uncertain whether to intercede again. They dared not question their master's authority, yet they sensed that something was dreadfully wrong. They walked in silence, their earlier chatter replaced by the sound of panting breath and the rattle of saddlebags shifting with each stride. Behind them, the angel withdrew momentarily, allowing Balaam to pass. But the air remained thick with tension, as if the very wind bore witness to the conflict between human ambition and heavenly mandate. The donkey's pace was slower now, hesitant, every fiber of its being attuned to a peril Balaam would never acknowledge. Yet the prophet spurred it on, driven by the desire to fulfill the king's summons and to taste the honor he believed awaited him at Moab's summit. In that first encounter, a gulf opened between Balaam's intentions and the spirit of obedience the Lord required. Balaam assumed divine permission equated to unfettered freedom. He believed that once granted leave, he need answer to no power but his own ambition. In his haste, he dismissed the sacred responsibility attached to God's word. He saw only a stubborn donkey. He did not see the hand of heaven guiding that animal's steps. And so he struck what he did not understand, unaware that the blows he dealt pressed his own destiny further from the path God intended. As the sun climbed higher, the road grew hotter and more oppressive. The donkey's laboring breaths stirred small eddies of dust, and Balaam felt a dull ache settle into his bones. He eased the reins and spoke to the animal in softer tones, apologizing for his cruelty, though not fully grasping its cause. The servants offered water from their leathern skins, and the donkey drank eagerly, its dark eyes still reflecting lingering terror. Balaam watched, chastened by the animal's suffering, and wondered vaguely whether he had acted too harshly. Yet he told himself that a prophet must not be slowed by trifles. Thus the caravan pressed on, the first clash with the unseen already casting long shadows across their destiny. Balaam rode in silence, the memory of his anger fresh as a wound. The prophet who had journeyed to curse now found himself learning a lesson in humility from a donkey he tried to dominate. In the vast stillness of the desert, where stones lay undisturbed for centuries, this moment of divine correction stood out like a single star in the noonday sky, brilliant, inexplicable, and impossible to ignore once recognized. Unaware of the angel's watchful presence and the cosmic struggle unfolding around him, Balaam guided his donkey toward the slopes of Pisgah. Each hoofbeat carried him closer to the scene where a king waited for curses, not blessings. Yet with every weary step, the weight of unacknowledged truth pressed down upon his shoulders. The journey had begun as a simple ride to Moab, but already it had become a test of the heart. Balaam traveled on, still blind to the adversary that had intercepted him, unaware that the road he thought he commanded was, in fact, under the sovereign control of the God whose voice he claimed to carry. Dawn's light had barely warmed the desert air by the time Balaam and his caravan reached the edge of the fertile valley that cradled Moab's famed vineyards. The narrow earthen trail wound between rows of gnarled vines, their trellises heavy with dark, juicy clusters. A gentle breeze stirred leaves lacquered in morning dew, setting them to whisper secrets of seasons past. To the casual eye, this was a tranquil passage, an oasis of abundance after the barrenness of the open plain. But Balaam's heart throbbed with tension, for he sensed that something unseen stirred among the vines, watching his progress with unblinking intent. The donkey, still trembling from the previous day's harsh blows, advanced with cautious reluctance. Each step was weighed and measured, nostrils flaring as it inhaled the heady perfume of ripening grapes. The two servants walked at its sides, laden with the prophet's staff and supplies, exchanging murmurs of concern. They had urged Balaam to show more kindness to the beast and animal that, they believed, had simply obeyed the impulses of a divine messenger. But Balaam, driven by frustration and a mounting impatience, had shown little sympathy. His gaze lingered on the distant highlands where Balak's banners fluttered in invitation, and his foot tapped restlessly in the stirrup. As they entered the narrow corridor between the vineyard walls, the donkey froze abruptly, its hoof dug into soft earth, and its body pressed against the rough stone boundary on one side, the low vine supports on the other. Balaam, unprepared, pitched forward as the creature jerked to a halt. A sudden pain shot through his right foot, pinned uncomfortably between saddle and the donkey's flank. He hissed, wrenching free with a grunt of pain, only to find his foot bloodied and bruised by the cruel pressure of stone and hide. "Get moving!" Balaam barked, ignoring the lambent glint in the donkey's eye, a mixture of fear and defiance. He raised his staff and struck the creature sharply across its side. The crack of wood on warm flesh rang out, startling the vineyard's birds into flight. Yet the donkey did not bolt forward as before. Instead, it shrank back, shoulders huddled as though trying to make itself smaller, pressed into the constricting passage. Its eyes shone with pain that mirrored Balaam's own. The servants cried out in alarm, rushing to soothe the animal, but Balaam's fury overcame him. Again he struck, harder this time, his arms swinging with the weight of wounded pride. "I tell you, move!" he snarled, voice ragged with irritation. The donkey whimpered, its sides shuddering beneath the blows, yet remained rooted to the spot. Balaam's anger rose, fueled by his throbbing foot and the urgency that pulsed within him. He had come this far under divine mandate, and yet every step felt contested. How dare a beast, an unreasoning creature, obstruct his path when a king waited on that summit? Blood pounded in Balaam's ears as he raised the staff once more. But before he could strike, the air seemed to still around him. Leaves above shook lightly, though no breeze stirred. A hush fell over the servants, and even the thrushes paused mid-song. It was as if the world itself held its breath to witness what would come next. Balaam hesitated for the first time, the haft of his staff trembling in his hand. In the slanted shaft of sunlight, he felt the weight of something vast and patient, an authority older than any throne or kingdom. The donkey, muscles taut with pain, quivered at his feet. Its breath came in short gasps, each exhalation a plea for mercy. Balaam's rage flickered conflict warred within him. A part of his heart recognized that this moment was more than a test of his will. It was the crossroads where obedience met ambition. To strike again would be to defy the very voice that had beckoned him to go, a voice that spoke through this humble creature. But to relent would be to surrender the grip he sought to maintain over his own destiny. For an instant, Balaam's anger gave way to shame. He lowered the staff, gaze hardening as he met the donkey's upturned eyes. The servants huddled close, murmuring soothing words, their hands gentle against the animal's sides. Balaam's breath came ragged, and he reached to cradle his injured foot, examining the swelling that pulsed beneath torn sandal leather. The pain reminded him of his own vulnerability, his own need for compassion. Yet the moment shattered as the donkey, terrified once more, lurched sideways. Its hind leg kicked out, and Balaam, off balance, staggered. His staff clattered against the vineyard stones, and for a heartbeat he teetered on the brink of falling. Then with a startled bray, The donkey squeezed past him into a small alcove where ripe grapes caromed off cracked stones. The servants gasped, but the creature had found refuge out of the narrow line, free of the angel's unseen blockade. Balaam, heart-pounding, glared down the vine corridor. He felt the presence again, an unassailable authority that demanded respect. His mind reeled as he recalled the clear words spoken the night before. "Only speak what I command." And before him stood this donkey, chosen vessel to reveal a truth he had tried to ignore. His heart clenched, torn between the stubborn drive for honor and the dawning realization that his journey was not solely his to command. At last, Balaam stepped aside, dropping his staff and loosening the reins. He approached the donkey with slow, measured steps, unaccustomed to humility, but unwilling to question the signs further. "I was wrong," he murmured, his voice low beneath the morning light. He pressed a gentle hand to the animal's flank, as though seeking forgiveness for the cruelty he had inflicted. The donkey quivered, but remained calm, as if sensing the prophet's genuine remorse. The servants exhaled in relief, gathering the staff and guiding the donkey back onto the center of the path. Balaam remounted, every movement careful to avoid aggravating his injured foot. The valley around them came alive again. The birds resumed their song, the leaves shimmered in the breeze, and distant voices rose where Balak's servants had prepared new offerings. Yet something profound had shifted beneath the surface of the journey. Balaam's own spirit felt lighter, liberated by the acknowledgement that his course was governed by more than human will. As they resumed their climb toward Pisgah's heights, the vineyard walls fell away, revealing a sweeping view of Moab's plains below. Balaam lifted his head, eyes soft with new resolve. He had been tested and found wanting in mercy, but he had chosen to heed the whimper of the lowliest of creatures. The poet's pulse steadied, and beside him, the donkey trod with quiet dignity. This second obstruction had carved indelible lines across Balaam's heart, teaching him that the path of obedience is often narrow and bordered by walls both seen and unseen. He understood now that divine encounters demand not only compliance, but compassion, that true prophecy flows from a heart attuned to every voice, no matter how small. And as the servants' choruses of encouragement rose behind him, Balaam set his gaze on the summit, prepared at last to speak only what the Lord would command, and only with a spirit that matched the mercy he had glimpsed in a donkey's eyes. The sun had climbed to its zenith by the time Balaam reached the third obstacle on his journey, a passage so constricted that it seemed he and his party had entered the womb of the earth itself. The narrow gorge lay between sheer rock walls, their surfaces polished smooth by centuries of wind and water. Not a vine nor a shrub dared cling to these cliffs. They rose like silent sentinels guarding a gateway no beast or man had ever broken. Here fate had drawn a line across the road, and Balaam sensed in his bones that this was no mere accident of terrain. His donkey trod tentatively into the chasm, nostrils flaring, ears swiveling as if listening for a warning. The two servants, weary but vigilant, followed close behind, their eyes wide with apprehension. They murmured among themselves, recalling how the beast had balked twice already, once in the open field, once among the vineyards. Each time the donkey had sensed the angel's presence and sought to avoid the divine messenger. Yet Balaam, driven by frustration, had beaten it back onto the path, insisting on progress over prudence. Now as they pressed deeper into the rocky corridor, an oppressive silence cloaked them. The world outside seemed to fade until only the ragged walls and the hot dust of their passage remained. The donkey walked on, but its steps slowed to a crawl, legs trembling with uncertainty. Balaam urged it forward, glancing over his shoulder with growing impatience. There was Balak's summit ahead, after all a moment of reckoning that he felt both drawn toward and fearful of. Suddenly the donkey halted as though nailed to the spot. Balaam pitched forward, pinning the animal's spine with the weight of his impatience. "Move!" he rasped, raising his staff. But the donkey would not budge. It quivered, eyes rolling toward a point higher up the gorge. Balaam straightened, squinting against the glare of midday sun. And then he saw it. A figure standing across the chasm, feet planted firm on a slender rock ledge, sword drawn, wings folded like a cloak of steel. The angel's countenance was hidden in shadow, but the blade at his side glowed with a pale, unearthly light. For a heartbeat, time stood still. The servants gasped. The donkey trembled so violently that Balaam feared it would collapse. Then, with a decisive movement, the animal sank to its knees and lay prostrate on the dusty floor. It would go no further, for to advance would mean stepping over the barrier the angel had erected. In that instant, the path to Moab's summit was blocked by a presence both majestic and terrifying. The prophet recognized with a shock that chilled his soul that in this narrow defile he stood on ground sacred and reserved for one message only. Anger flared in Balaam's chest, a fierce heat that matched the noonday sun. He seized the staff in both hands, knuckles white, and struck the donkey without hesitation. The crack of wood on flesh rang harshly against the gorge walls, echoing like a war drum. The beast let out a guttural cry, but did not move. Balaam struck again, fury driving each blow, intent on forcing the animal upright. He would not be turned back at the threshold of destiny. He would not yield to a stone, nor an unseen adversary. The servants cried out, rushing forward to plead for mercy, but Balaam's vision blurred with rage. He beat the donkey until his arms ached, until sweat ran down his face in great wet drops. Only when his staff splintered in his hand did he pause, chest heaving, eyes ablaze. He stood over the prostrate creature, panting, as the servants knelt to comfort it. Then at last Balaam looked up and found himself gazing directly into the angel's eyes. In that gaze burned a light too fierce for mortal endurance. Balaam froze, the remnants of his staff falling clattering to the dust. His knees buckled, and he dropped to his own knees beside the donkey, shame radiating through him like fire. He had lashed out at a creature that sought only to protect him, to honor the word he had been charged to speak. And he had done so in defiance of the very will that had beckoned him on this journey. The angel stepped forward into a shaft of sunlight, sword lowered but still gleaming. His voice was neither harsh nor kind, rather, it carried the weight of eternity. Why have you beaten your donkey these 3 times? Behold, I came out to oppose you, because your way was perverse before me. And the donkey saw me and turned aside these 3 times. If she had not turned aside, I would surely have killed you and let her live. Those words struck Balaam harder than any blow he had given the beast. He bowed his head, tears blurring his sight, as the weight of his own pride and wrath crushed him. The servants gathered around, but even they dared not speak. They watched as their master confronted the divine messenger he had so grievously wronged. Balaam felt the desert wind stir through the canyon, carrying with it the echo of his failures. Gathering what strength remained, he forced himself to meet the angel's gaze. "I have sinned," he whispered, voice ragged. "I did not know it was you standing in the way. I only saw a barrier, an obstacle between me and the king's summons. Forgive me, and then tell me what word the Lord would have me speak." The angel's expression softened, though the light in his eyes remained unyielding. He lifted his hand, and the narrow gorge seemed to expand, the walls receding as though breathing. "Go with the men," he said, "but speak only the word that I tell you." At that moment, the donkey rose unsteadily to its feet, shaking its sides as though awakening from a dream. It looked at Balaam with a gentleness that pierced his heart. Balaam knelt beside it, hands trembling as he brushed away dust and tears. The servants offered water and bandaged the donkey's flanks, murmuring words of both comfort and warning. Balaam remounted, every movement cautious now, his fingers brushing the broken staff at his side. He glanced at the gorge walls, now benign and silent, and felt the gravity of the angel's words settle within him. His mission was no longer an enterprise of ambition or reward. It was a sacred commission that demanded not only obedience, but humility. As they emerged from the narrow pass, the welcome expanse of Moab's plains opened before them. The tents of Israel gleamed like silver in the afternoon sun, and Balak's pavilion shimmered atop Pisgah's heights. Yet Balaam felt no triumph. Instead, he felt a solemn responsibility weigh upon him, an obligation to speak only as he had been commanded, and to honor the divine messenger who had stood, sword drawn, to guard the integrity of his journey. Thus, the third blockade became not simply an obstacle of rock and shadow, but a crucible that refined Balaam's spirit. He would ride on, but with a heart chastened by the blows he had dealt and the mercy he had received. And in the evening light, as the wind stirred the grasses of the plain, Balaam prepared himself to deliver a word that could shape destinies for better or for worse, knowing now that true prophecy resides in a heart aligned with the voice that echoes beyond the narrow paths of human desire. A sudden hush descended across the rocky canyon as Balaam raised his staff, ready to strike the donkey yet again for refusing to move. His heart pounded with indignation and confusion. How dare this beast obstruct his path when a king waited on the heights? He lifted the staff, preparing to deliver another blow, when in that very instant, a clear, unmistakable voice stopped him in mid-swing. "What have I done to you to make you beat me these 3 times?" the donkey said, its tone both plaintive and weary. Balaam froze. His arm hung suspended in the air, staff trembling between his fingers. His eyes widened as he stared at the animal beneath him. There, plain as day in the mid-morning light, the donkey's lips moved, forming words no one but a human had the power to voice. For a heartbeat, neither Balaam nor his servants dared to breathe. Then shock gave way to incredulous fury. "You speak to me?" Balaam blurted, voice cracking with equal parts astonishment and anger. "If only there were a sword in my hand, I would strike you dead this very moment." The donkey's shoulders sagged beneath Balaam's mounting rage. It cast its eyes down in resignation and said, "Am I not your donkey, whom you have ridden ever since I belonged to you? Was I ever wont to do this to you?" Balaam recoiled as though the beast's simple question had burned him. He pressed one hand to his chest, heart racing. "No," he stammered, voice hollow with confusion. "Until today, you have always borne me faithfully. What has happened to change you now?" The donkey looked at him with sorrowful eyes. "You have beaten me these 3 times, it replied softly. "When I saw an angel standing in the road and would have turned aside, you struck me. When I found no room to pass among the vineyards and crushed your foot against the wall, you struck me. And now when I saw the angel again and lay down under you to spare your life, you would have beaten me if I had not spoken." Balaam's breath caught. Each word was like an arrow piercing his pride, exposing the cruelty he had inflicted on a creature whose only crime was saving him. He sank deeper into his saddle, the staff slipping from his grasp. His servants crowded around, faces pale with awe, but none dared speak. "Why do you persist in this path?" the donkey continued, its voice patient yet firm. "Do you not know you walk under divine watch? Do you not perceive that I acted to protect your life from one who would slay you?" Balaam swallowed hard, his mind reeling. Desperation and shame warred within him. I did not see," he finally managed. "I saw only obstacles, fields, vines, and stony walls. I saw no angel. I knew only the king's summons and the promise of reward. I struck you in anger and impatience." The donkey's ears flicked, as though hearing a confession that brought it neither relief nor further comfort. "Every strike you dealt was meant to redirect me from a danger you could not discern. Yet you punished loyalty and obedience because you failed to look beyond your own desires." Balaam's eyes filled with tears. He pressed his palm to his forehead, the weight of his failure settling upon him like a lead cloak. "I was wrong," he murmured. "I have sinned against you and against the Lord. I let ambition and pride blind me to what was true and real." The donkey lowered its head, acknowledging his contrition, but did not reply. Its silence spoke volumes, reminding Balaam that confession must be followed by transformation. The servants knelt and tended to the animal, offering water and soft words. The donkey drank gratefully, then looked back to Balaam as though waiting for him to act on his remorse. Balaam dismounted, knees trembling as he knelt beside the donkey. He reached out and stroked its neck, voice choked with emotion. "Please forgive me," he whispered. "Forgive the prophet who forgot to see what was before his eyes. Forgive the man who mistook divine protection for stubbornness." He pressed his forehead to the donkey's mane, tears falling onto its fur. The donkey stood still, as though granting absolution, and Balaam rose slowly, steadying himself on the animal's flank. He felt a new clarity flooding his mind, a conviction that his journey had never been about earthly reward, but about faithfully carrying the word he would receive. With trembling fingers, he gathered the reins. "Let us go," he said softly, addressing both donkey and servants. But this time, with eyes and heart open to every messenger of the Lord, whether in form of man, spirit, or beast. As they remounted, the canyon walls seemed to breathe around them. The oppressive weight of anger lifted, replaced by a solemn peace. The donkey trod forward obediently, but no longer with the frightened hesitation of before. It carried Balaam's repentance and newfound humility, as well as it carried the prophet himself. Moments later, Balaam saw the angel step into view, the same celestial guardian who had turned him back at every blockade. This time, however, Balaam dismounted again, staff lowered in reverence. The angel's visage was grave, yet there was a softness in those shadowed eyes, a readiness to guide rather than rebuke. But Balaam did not speak to the angel yet. He turned once more to the donkey, kneeling beside it in quiet gratitude. The servants watched in awe as the prophet treated the beast not as mere beast, but as a bearer of divine message. When Balaam finally rose, he addressed the angel with newfound humility and prepared to hear the word that would shape the fate of nations. And so, in that miraculous moment when a donkey spoke and a prophet listened, the boundary between heaven and earth dissolved for a fleeting instant, and Balaam's true mission began in earnest. The wind whispered through the canyon walls as Balaam knelt beside his donkey, the weight of his own cruelty still fresh in his bones. He pressed his forehead against the animal's mane, tasting the dust of repentance on his lips. In that moment of contrition, the world shifted around him. Light unseen before flooded his senses, and his vision snapped into sharp relief. There, half a rod's length from where he knelt, stood the angel of the Lord, sword drawn, wings folded sternly at his back. The blade, once invisible to Balaam's eyes, now glinted with an unearthly sheen, as though forged in the very heart of heaven. Balaam's breath caught. He staggered to his feet, heart pounding in his throat like a captive bird. The angle of the sunlight cast the angel's face in shadow, yet Balaam could feel the weight of divine authority pressing upon him. Gone was the haze that had clouded his sight, the spiritual blindness that had let him strike a faithful creature again and again. Now he saw without pretense, a warrior of the Most High, standing guard against any misstep in the prophet's path. For a moment, time itself seemed to pause. The canyon stones, smoothed by centuries of wind, held their silent witness. The servants, too, halted in awe, each footstep frozen as they beheld the heavenly messenger. Not a whisper escaped any lips, for the air was charged with an intensity that transcended words. And then, in a voice that resonated like distant thunder, yet carried the stillness of dawn, the angel spoke. "Why have you beaten your donkey these 3 times?" the holy envoy asked, each syllable carrying the weight of judgment and mercy alike. "Do you not recognize the path I have appointed? Your way was perverse before me, and you would have ridden past without heed of the divine command." Balaam's knees buckled beneath him, and he sank to the ground, hands pressed to his face as tears sprung unbidden. He had come to Moab with dreams of honor and coin, believing that the crowns of men could outshine the crown of obedience. He had forgotten that every step of this journey was set before him by the Lord, that the road itself was consecrated ground holy, not for who walked it, but for whose voice spoke through its boundaries. Between tremulous sobs, Balaam raised his head. His eyes, red-rimmed and brimming with remorse, met the angel's unflinching gaze. "I have sinned," he confessed, voice choked yet clear. "I did not know it was you in the way. I did not see your sword raised to protect me. I saw only obstacles, fields, vines, and walls, and I beat the creature who sought only to keep me from harm." "Forgive me, Lord, and I will turn back from this path." The angel's wings shifted imperceptibly, a silent breath drawn in response to the prophet's contrition. "Get up," he commanded, tone softer yet unwavering. "I have come forth to oppose you because your heart would wander from the words you were told to speak. Yet now you have humbled yourself, acknowledging your sin. Go with the men, but speak only the word that I tell you." Balaam rose, each movement trembling but determined. He glanced at his donkey, which stood patiently as though understanding the gravity of the moment. The animal's eyes held no hint of resentment, only a gentle steadfastness that mirrored the mercy Balaam had just received. He reached out a hand to stroke its ears, offering a silent vow of kindness and gratitude. Then he turned back to the angel. "I will obey," he declared, voice steadied by resolve. "Show me the way, and I will speak only as you command." The angel nodded once, as if satisfied by the prophet's sincerity. With a sweep of his arm, the narrow passage before them seemed to widen, the canyon walls receding as though granting safe passage once more. The midday sun poured down upon Balaam's head, warming him with the promise of a second chance, a chance to speak truth instead of ambition, obedience instead of self-will. Behind him, the servants exchanged glances. Relief and reverence mingled in their expressions. They gathered the donkey's reins and prepared to remount. But Balaam gestured for them to wait. He knelt again, this time in prayer, raising his hands toward the sky, as though reaching for the very throne of heaven. "O Lord, thank you for opening my eyes," he whispered. "Thank you for showing me the folly of my ways and teaching me compassion. Guide my lips so that I may honor your name." The canyon held its breath, the wind stilling to listen. Then, as though in response, a single shaft of light pierced the veil of shadow, illuminating Balaam's bowed form. It was a seal upon the prophet's heart, a divine imprint that would remain long after the journey to Moab was done. When Balaam rose, his shoulders no longer bore the weight of arrogance, but the mantle of humility. He climbed back onto his donkey, and at his side the servants took their places. The donkey, for its part, stepped forward with renewed calm, each hoofbeat a quiet testament to the restored order between man and creature, between prophet and protector. As they resumed their ascent toward Pisgah's summit, Balaam glanced back at the narrow gorge, the place where he had been taught the necessity of seeing beyond the surface of circumstance. In place of the silent walls, he now envisioned the vigilant angel who had stood guard, sword drawn not to punish, but to guide. He knew that from this moment on, his every word would be a covenant, each syllable a measure of the fidelity he now owed to the Lord. The plain of Moab stretched out before them, a tapestry of shifting sands and distant tents that shimmered like stars fallen to earth. But Balaam's gaze turned inward, focused upon the echo of mercy he had received. He would not be the mouthpiece of mortal ambition. He would speak only the word of the Almighty, trusting that true blessing flows not from coins in hand, but from obedience in heart. Thus, with eyes opened and spirit renewed, Balaam pressed on, no longer a prophet wrestling with personal desire, but a humbled servant ready to deliver the word of the Lord, wherever it might lead. The sun hung low over the plains of Moab as Balaam's small company crested the final rise and beheld Balak's encampment spread out at their feet. Tents of crimson and gold fluttered like banners beneath the evening breeze, and a cluster of marble pillars glinted in the dying light, a makeshift palace erected for the prophet's arrival. Balaam felt a knot of nerves tighten in his chest. Every mile of that dusty trail had been fraught with unseen perils and divine corrections. And now he stood at the threshold of a king's expectation. His donkey picked its way down the rocky slope, hooves crunching against scattered stones. Balaam's two servants followed with reverent steps, carrying his staff and the handful of provisions he would need. Though his foot still throbbed from its encounter with the vineyard wall, Balaam set his jaw against the pain, determined to fulfill his calling. He had been vindicated once by the angel's revelation. Now he must face the mortal sovereign who awaited his words. At the camp's edge, Balak himself emerged, a man of middling height, swathed in purple, his crown of bronze perched at a rakish angle. He strode forward, entourage in tow, priests holding incense burners, nobles bearing trays of silver goblets, and trumpeters whose instruments lay silent until summoned. Balak's eyes, dark with expectancy, fixed on Balaam's approach. "Where have you been?" Balak demanded, voice sharp as the desert wind. "I sent for you at dawn. Why have you tarried until dusk?" The question cut through the gathering like a blade, and even the trumpets shuddered in their slumber. Balaam dismounted, folding one leg of his robe with a deliberate gesture of respect. He earned for himself a company of watchful stares, ministers who hoped he would curse Israel, soldiers who trembled at the thought of an army blessed by heaven, and courtiers who counted their fortunes on Balak's triumph or defeat. Balaam felt their gaze as a tangible weight, but he lifted his chin. "My lord king," he replied, voice calm and measured, "I came at your summons as swiftly as God permitted. Yet the Lord said to me, 'Go with these men, but speak only the word that I command you.' My delay was not born of contempt, but of obedience. I would not speak what was not given me to speak." Balak's face flickered with something between frustration and intrigue. He stepped closer, as though hoping to seize a glimpse of what made Balaam's words tremble with authority. "You speak of obedience," he said, "but what of the wealth I have laid before you? What of the honor of standing in my court, cloaked in purple, praised by all Moab? Is that not sufficient inducement to turn your lips into a weapon against Israel?" Balaam held the king's gaze without flinching. "All the silver and gold in Moab would not sway my speech," he answered, "for I have learned that the Lord's word is not for sale. If I am a prophet, it is by his making, yet even so, I am but his servant. I must speak his blessing or his curse, as he commands, not as mortal kings desire." A murmur rippled through the assembly. The priests exchanged uneasy glances, for they had baked images of Israel's downfall in the flickering glow of their incense fires. Soldiers nodded as though prophesying war, and the nobles fanned themselves in eager anticipation. Balak's brow furrowed, but he recovered quickly, clapping his hands once. "Very well," the king declared. "If silver and gold cannot persuade you, then behold the power of Moab. I have prepared 7 altars here, and upon each I have laid a bullock and a ram. I shall stand beside you, and you shall pronounce the curse upon Israel from each altar in turn. Surely the sight of my devotion will incline your heart to do what must be done." He gestured to the priests, who began to kindle the fires atop the stone altars. Plumes of fragrant smoke coiled into the sky as Balak's attendants arranged the sacrificial beast with solemn ritual. Balaam watched with steady calm, mindful of the charge laid on him by the angel. "Speak only what I tell you." He could feel the tension in the air tighten into an invisible noose around his resolve. Balak led him to the first altar, where the priest draped the slain bullock's carcass across its stones. Balak placed his hand on Balaam's shoulder. "Look upon the camp of Israel." His voice trembled with suppressed eagerness. "Curse them now, that they may depart from us." Balaam raised his staff, eyes drifting beyond Balak's shoulder to the plateau below, where Israel's tents lay, gleaming like ivory under the moon's first light. He inhaled the desert air dry, fragrant with sage, tinged with smoke, and felt a hush around his heart. He knew what must be said. The prophet spoke, voice echoing across the silent plain. "How can I curse whom God has not cursed? How can I denounce whom the Lord has not denounced?" His words carried the weight of eternity, and in their resonance, the assembled Moabites felt a shift. Balak's fingers tightened on Balaam's shoulder as though he might shake out a curse by force. Balaam continued, "From the top of the rocks I see them, and from the hills I behold them. Lo, a people dwelling alone, and not reckoning itself among the nations. Who can count the dust of Jacob, or number the 4th part of Israel? Let me die the death of the righteous, and let my last end be like his." A gasp rose from the circle of priests. The smoke from the altar coiled upward and drifted toward the heavens, as if carried on the breath of the words themselves. Balak's face hardened, yet he summoned his composure. "You have blessed them these 3 times, he said, voice taut. Why then do you not curse them as I have asked?" Balaam turned to face the king fully, the firelight flickering in his eyes. "Behold, I have received the word of the Lord, and he has blessed. Neither height nor depth can change his counsel. The word he speaks must stand." He straightened, releasing Balak's shoulder in a gesture that carried both finality and compassion. Balak ground his teeth. He was a mighty king, accustomed to bending prophets and generals alike to his will. Yet here he was, confronted by a man whose allegiance lay beyond any mortal throne. A hush fell as Moab's host watched the quiet victory of divine purpose over human ambition. But Balak was not yet ready to concede. He signaled the priests to prepare the remaining altars. "Then let us go higher," he said. "We shall build another altar by the topmost ridge, and there your word will be heard in full." He would not be denied until every stone had borne witness to his desire. Balaam permitted himself a faint nod. Though weariness pressed upon him, fatigue woven from long journeys and spiritual battles, he understood that this was the climax of his calling. Each altar, each sacrifice was a stage on which the sovereignty of God would be proclaimed, and each time, the king's hope would be dashed upon the rock of divine decree. So they moved to the second altar, and again Balak entreated, and again Balaam spoke only blessing. Lava of wrath could not flow from his lips, for the fountainhead of his words was the Lord himself. On the third altar, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, and the seventh, each time the same refrain, each time the same revelation. Israel stood under a protection no mortal power could undo. With every blessing, Balak's heart sank deeper. The priest's murmurings grew anxious. Soldiers shifted restlessly. The trumpets lay idle. Yet despite it all, Balaam remained unshaken, for his resolve had been forged in the crucible of the angel's word. He spoke on behalf of the Most High, not on behalf of any earthly throne. When the seventh altar's flames died to embers, Balak stood in the stunned silence. He had summoned a curse, offered silver and gold, burned sacrifices upon 7 altars, and received instead an unbroken chain of blessings. His crown felt heavier now, laden with the weight of failure. Balaam, in contrast, felt lighter. Freed from the entanglement of human designs, he had fulfilled the greater purpose for which he was called. The king's voice trembled as he addressed the prophet one final time. "I asked for ruin upon my foes, yet you have given them life. What profit is there in favor unasked if it defeats the heart's desire?" Balaam met Balak's gaze with gentleness. "My king, true profit lies not in momentary triumph, but in alignment with the divine will. Your rites and your altars were grand, but the Lord's plan is grander still. He blesses according to his purpose, and no hand, neither human nor prophetic, can divert him once he has spoken." A profound hush settled over the plain. Balak's attendants bowed their heads. Even the night wind carried no sound, as though the world itself paused to mark the moment when human expectation gave way to divine sovereignty. And so Balaam's resolve shone clear. He was not a mouthpiece for mortal ambition, but a servant of the one whose voice transcends thrones and crowns. In Moab's finest court, beneath the watchful stars, he had found the courage to speak truth to power, and in doing so, had affirmed that the prophet's ultimate allegiance belongs not to king or kingdom, but to the living word of God. A hush fell over the plain as Balaam lifted his eyes toward the Israelite camp, the flickering torchlights revealing a sea of white tents sprawled across the valley floor. He stood on the first stone altar, its fire reduced to glowing embers, and inhaled the dry desert air. Before him lay the people of Israel, countless as stars, settled by the hand of a God whose purposes could not be thwarted by human schemes. Balak, cloaked in royal robes, stood at his side, eyes narrowed with expectation and frustration. Balaam knew the king had summoned him to pronounce ruin, but in his heart thundered a different word, blessing. He raised his staff, and the words came as though carried on the wind itself. "How can I curse whom God has not cursed? Or how can I denounce whom the Lord has not denounced? From the top of the rocks I see them, and from the hills I behold them. Lo, a people dwelling alone, and not reckoning itself among the nations. His voice echoed across the silent tents, stirring a trembling murmur among the Israelite sentries. Balak's jaw tightened as the first oracle settled upon the crowd. Isaiah's language would later call them a people set apart, and Balaam's first proclamation stood as living proof of God's intention to exalt rather than abase this nation. But Balak's hope would not be quelled so easily. He summoned his servants and bade them lead Balaam to a different vantage higher ground, where the sacrifice might find a more receptive wind. They ascended to the summit of Bamoth Baal, a hill overlooking the eastern horizon. There, amidst the rocky outcrops and thorny shrubs, Balak built another altar, maintained the sacred fire, and stood amid swirling incense, his heart pounding with anticipation. Would the fresh breeze carry a curse upon Israel this time? Once again, Balaam turned his gaze toward the assembly of Israelites, their fires glowing faint like distant beacons in the gathering dusk. The king's voice was strained. "Curse them from here." But Balaam's lips were sealed until the true master of the universe stirred within him. Then with a solemn breath he spoke, "Rise up, O Balaam, and hear. Hearken unto the oracle of him who hears the words of God, and knows the knowledge of the Most High, who sees the vision of the Almighty." His words wove a tapestry of eternal promise. "I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not nigh. There shall come a star out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel." In that moment, the king's hopes were dashed upon the unbreakable will of God, whose covenant children no curse could crush. Balak's shoulders slumped in exasperation, yet he would not relent. He ordered Balaam brought to a third peak, Mount Pisgah, where the air whistled between ancient stones, and the camp of Israel lay exposed like a panorama. 7 altars rose there, their fires flickering under the watchful eyes of Moab's dignitaries. Balak's voice quavered as he entreated the prophet a final time. "I have built 7 altars and offered 7 sacrifices. Curse them now from this spot." Balaam's heart beat steadily. He felt the weight of destiny on his shoulders, not a destiny of fame or silver, but a destiny bound to the Almighty's decree. He lifted his eyes to the heavens, as if seeking the heavenly scroll upon which the fate of nations was inscribed. Then with measured calm, he proclaimed his third oracle. "The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace." His words fell upon the valley like gentle rain, saturating the land with blessing and sending a ripple of awe through Moab's onlookers. Balak's frustration turned to fury. He struck his staff against the nearest altar, scattering ashes into the wind. His court murmured in consternation, for they had expected the dark thunder of condemnation, not the benediction of abundant life. Yet Balaam stood unwavering, his resolve anchored in the revelation that God's sovereignty cannot be subverted by human longing or royal decree. Each oracle had traced the arc of divine purpose: Israel's deliverance, Israel's royal destiny, Israel's peace. As the last echoes of blessing faded into the desert twilight, the prophet folded his robe with quiet dignity. Balak, towering in rage, bellowed his final demand. But Balaam turned away, his voice gentle but resolute. "Why then do you contend against him who is not able to save? For the Lord, he is God. Let the people praise him, though children of the stubborn are kindled with fire." His words were not a curse, but a mirror held to the king's pride, reflecting the futility of striving against the current of divine will. In the hush that followed, Balak's courtiers untied their robes and strode away, unwilling to share the prophet's new allegiance. Soldiers lowered their spears, and priests withdrew their censers. Even the trumpets fell silent. For no longer did Moab hold the narrative of power. They had witnessed the unshakable truth that blessings flow not from the lips of men, but from the mouth of the Almighty. Balaam gathered his staff and prepared to depart. The silver and gold of Moab left unused. His heart carried the echo of those oracles: 3 peaks, 3 blessings, 1 unalterable purpose. God's promise stands firm while human devices dissolve like morning mist. As he mounted his donkey beside the empty altars, He glanced once more at the camp of Israel, where smoke rose from evening fires and the people lay in peaceful slumber. The land itself seemed to breathe contentment, cradled in the shadow of divine favor. Behind him, Balak's voice trailed into the wind, a final lament of power denied. "I called upon you to curse, yet you have blessed." But Balaam offered no response. He knew that the truest measure of prophecy is not compliance with mortal desires, but faithfulness to the word that formed the cosmos. His journey back would be lit not by the glow of personal gain, but by the eternal light of God's sovereignty, a light that neither king nor prophet could extinguish. And so, with blessings in place of curses, Balaam took leave of Moab, carrying with him the living testament that when heaven speaks, earth must listen. When divine purpose moves, mortal ambition must yield. And when God's sovereignty reigns, no altar of gold can alter the course of his eternal will. As the campfires of Moab fade into the distance, we find ourselves looking back at a journey marked not by royal splendor or prophetic boasts, but by the humble gaze of a donkey. This lowly creature did what the learned prophet could not. It saw the angel standing guard, sword drawn, and diverted its master's path to keep him from harm. In doing so, the donkey became an unexpected herald of divine truth, a reminder that God often speaks through the voices we least expect. Balaam's tale teaches us that spiritual sight isn't measured by titles or eloquence, but by a heart attuned to the unseen. The prophet, armed with the reputation of remarkable visions, was blind to the angel blocking his way. Yet the donkey, with no gift for prophecy, perceived the heavenly messenger and acted in obedience. It was only when Balaam chose to listen, when he opened his eyes and his heart, that he understood the gravity of God's protection and the futility of pursuing personal gain over divine will. From that moment on, each step Balaam took was guided by a new humility. He learned that obedience to God outweighs any promise of honor or reward. The prophet's staff, once raised in anger, became a symbol of his surrender to the voice of heaven. His lips, once ready to curse, were reshaped into channels of blessing, declaring the unshakable sovereignty of the Lord over Israel. In every oracle, Balaam affirmed that God's purpose cannot be bought or bent. It is the bedrock upon which all true prophecy stands. We too can draw strength and guidance from this story. How often do we, like Balaam, charge ahead with our own agendas, unaware of the divine roadblocks set to shape us? Perhaps we dismiss the quiet nudges of conscience or overlook the gentle promptings of a friend. Yet God's messages may come in the soft bray of a donkey, the timely word of a neighbor, or the still, small voice within. To miss these moments is to stumble blindly, risking the very blessings we seek. So what can we carry home from this remarkable narrative? First, let us cultivate eyes to see beyond circumstances, to recognize that every obstacle may be an opportunity for divine redirection. Second, let us choose obedience over ambition, allowing God's will to guide our steps rather than the lure of temporary gain. Finally, let us remain open to unexpected messengers, understanding that God delights in surprising us with wisdom from the most unlikely sources. Have you ever been guided by a voice you didn't expect? Maybe it was a child's insight, a stranger's kindness, or an inner conviction that altered your path for the better. Today, listen closely to those whispers around you. They may just be the donkey's bray calling you back to the way of blessing. If this exploration of Balaam and his faithful donkey has stirred something in your heart, join us on Biblical Journey for more stories that illuminate the power of God's voice in ordinary lives. Remember to like, subscribe, and share this video so others can discover how the Lord speaks through the most unexpected messengers. Until next time, keep your eyes and your heart wide open.